Good morning. Our opening words this morning come from UU Minister Matthew Johnson. For 5,000 years or more than 15,000 generations, human beings have been invoking spiritual power. My predecessors and yours have gathered together to make sense of their lives and their place in the cosmos. And they have spoken aloud and invited what they conceived as sacred and powerful to be with them. They called upon the spirits of air and earth, fire and water. They called the bear and the deer. They asked for the raven to protect them. They pleaded for the heroes of old to slay the monsters of their fears. They sang songs they learned from their grandparents and moved in the appointed ways, or in ways that were new, but felt like the right thing to do. And they imbued power to these spirits and to the memories of those heroes. They called them gods, and they were invoked. Vishnu and Kali, Elohim, Odin, and 100 million others. Every group of people everywhere. They gathered to make sense of their lives and to make sense of their place in the cosmos, and they called these spirits to be present to them. And so do we. So do we. We gather this morning to make sense of ourselves and this universe in which we live as best as we are able. And we call ourselves to worship together, and we invoke the power and wonder of life itself, that to which all those animals and memories of heroes pointed the way. We invoke that power, which is always around us, always with us, but which we sometimes forget about. We forget that we are part of the whole of creation. We forget that we are stardust. We forget that we are capable of miracles, first among them, that we can love. We forget these things, so we invoke the power of existence, so that we can remember, so we can lift our eyes and open our ears to the true and beautiful. For 5,000 years or more, we have done this. In many tongues, in many ways, we have done this. And so we continue that ancient tradition in our way and in our time. I realized that I did not pack matches when I came on this trip, but I have this beautiful chalice, and in the spirit of miracle, I invite you to imagine it flaming with a beautiful, miraculous flame. We consider our chalice to have now been lit. We'll now enjoy some opening music. Good morning and welcome to First Parish in Bedford to our summer online service this morning. I'm Reverend Annie Gonzalez Milliken, and I am coming to worship from Rochester, New York today from an Airbnb where I'm traveling. One of the few perks of this pandemic is that we can worship together regardless of our location in space. I'm really glad that you are here this morning, whether you're popping in for the first time or someone who's been holding this community down through thick and thin, and everyone in between. We're glad you're with us. We have some more wonderful summer services in the month of August that will be led by members of the congregation, just as this one has been put together by Dorothy Africa. And I see that folks are really excited about these beautiful pieces of music Dorothy has chosen. And indeed, they're very interesting, unique pieces. And absolutely, you can have the links to the music. We can send that out after the service so everyone can enjoy these pieces. And I know we'll get some more context about them from Dorothy later this morning. In August, we have a service led by our youth coordinator, Sarah Klikowski, about apocalypse. We have the Peace and Justice Committee talking about the important topic of atomic bombs and how we can commit to never having these atrocities again. We have suffragists from next door with our town historian, Sharon McDonald, and we'll have a service on the power of music and conversation with Carol Eppel, Liz Connors, and Janet Welby. So you won't want to miss those. Those will be wonderful as well. And we also will be having on Saturday, August 8th, the last in a series I've been leading about Another World is Possible, looking at police and prisons and racism and what kind of world we can build instead of the one we have. And if you have skills to be an assistant treasurer, that would be fantastic. Please let us know. Contact Vicki Gaw about that. And we would still love if you are feeling like you have a gift to share with the children and youth of this congregation in our adapted religious education program for the fall. We would love, love, love to hear from you. You can contact our DRE, our Director of Faith Development for Children, that is Deb Weiner, about that. And so now I will invite you to join in our unison affirmation, and the words will be appearing shortly on your screen. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So to keep this beautiful community thriving and creating programs in pandemic times and in times when we can gather in person, we do, of course, rely on the generosity of this community, which has been exceedingly generous even in these times that are financially difficult. We are very grateful, and we will be hearing another beautiful and interesting piece of music during this morning's offertory as we collect your donations, which can be made following the instructions on the screen. Thank you so much. And again, we will have another piece of music to bring us into learning more about the miracles of Irish saints.
Morning, everybody. Thank you all for showing up to hear about miracles. And thank you both, Delcy and Annie, for your wonderful contributions to the morning. The whistle in the Latin American pastoral we heard for the offertory, and the shawm in the traditional tune from the Channel Islands we just heard, tell us that the music is about rustic folk. In these two medieval miracle tales, we are also dealing with rustics, laypersons whom no one would expect to be miracle workers. Indeed, neither of the two protagonists from these stories, a carpenter and a farmer, seem to be good examples of the blessed man, the Beatus Vir of Psalm 112, a person really worthy to be an accidental wonder worker. Miracles do not enter much into my personal belief, or I suppose for most of you. Indeed, miracles come up mostly just as a figure of speech. But as a historian, I am interested in how early Christian Irish people viewed themselves, what their religious beliefs may have been, and how they might have integrated with their previous religious conceptions. Miracle stories are good ways to get a look at those. Moreover, sometimes when I read these saint stories, I'm surprised to find how deeply they resonate with my own wishes, desires, and fantasies. The medieval Irish lived in a far more mysterious world than we do, and they turned to druids and priests for explanations and aid in the face of disease, crop failures, illness, reversals of fortune, and mortality. In such a world, miracles were a tangible proof of divine power and offered the reassurance that this power was benign. I think in the times of COVID, if you think, what would we make of it if we didn't know the science behind it all? For these things, I look to science, but I must confess I believe that such things as black holes, distant galaxies, and dark matter are real because of my faith in science, not because of my own personal experience running into a black hole on the way to the supermarket. In that regard, medievals had a richer spiritual awareness than I do, since their lives were so often punctured by happenings that appeared to them as interventions of capricious supernatural powers. As they were awed by an infinite and omnipotent God, I am prepared to marvel and be awed by the vastness of science and space and the universe. But also, like my medievals, I sometimes find myself hoping that a little bit of that power might be spared for me, if only to help me find the car keys. As the song says, would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man? Here are two stories by two different hagiographers, and hagiographers are persons who write about saints, using the theme of an ordinary person performing a miracle through his or her own strength of faith. The biblical model for this is Matthew 15, verses 22 through 28, that we saw as a thought to ponder, in which a Canaanite woman requests Jesus to heal her daughter. He refuses because she isn't Jewish. In fact, he scorns her, but she persists, and finally he says, as noted, that her faith is great, so let it be to you even as you wish, and the daughter is healed. These two Irish hagiographers present us with two very different takes on this accidental miracle topos. The first one is from the life of Saint Savin. Now you have to take my word for this because I can't give you a whole précis of the Savin life, which is very short, but her hagiographer is very practical and very visual in his or her writing, and very interested in what makes humans tick. Now, Saint Savin wants to build an oratory for her small community. Amid a scattered rural population, as in medieval Ireland, the manpower and material to build anything is hard to come by. Only a large men's community would have the resources to build in stone. Now, Glendalough, for which I hope we have a slide here, was a very large men's community stretching along a river valley. It's a little later actually than our period, but it'll give you the idea. There were men there who were priests, so they could use a church, as the women's communities could not. And Savin's community at Clonbrony would not have had this kind of wealth. Hers was a small rural women's group. However, the women have managed to assemble the resources necessary, find the manpower to do this construction project. Her oratory would probably look more like this small sill structure of the Norse chapel, minus the stone foundation. So here enters the carpenter, and he has cast his eye upon the scanty provisions gathered to feed the workers. He knows it is not enough. And he thinks aloud, or says aloud, we don't know, what is needed. And poof, there it is, to Savin's amusement. The hagiographer tells us a lot here in a short space, and recalls also the miracle of the loaves and the fishes to boot, but two important things stand out. First, the carpenter's wish was genuine and deeply felt. The hagiographer tells us that his soul desired it. Second, the response of the saint to the carpenter's accidental miracle is to laugh. At first glance, the saint has done nothing, but she is not just a casual bystander. It is probably easiest for me to explain the relationship of saint to miracle here if we think in terms of a modern analogy. If you take your computer to Starbucks to get some work done, you provide the computer and you are doing the work. However, you are using the Starbucks Wi-Fi. In this instance, Savin is the carpenter's Wi-Fi. She knows what has transpired, but why should she laugh? Now, Irish saints in general, for that matter, are not the ho-ho, jolly, jolly kind of people. And so her instance of laughter is a very rare one. I suspect in this exemplum that there may have been something in that the hagiographer may have been influenced, probably unconsciously, by verse 5 from Psalm 112 that we heard at the beginning of the service, describing the blessed man, the Beatus Vir. Jucundus homo qui miseratur et commoda. This is badly translated in the King James Version as the good or gracious man, the Jucundus homo. Jucundus comes from Yoko, to say in jest. It's our word joke. Hence, he is a mirthful man, a delightful man, who pities and obliges. Now, like Savin, don't we all get a kick out of helping somebody work a miracle? Now, the Ita hagiographer is a very different bloke, and he writes in a very different fashion. This is a piece I thought you might like to see what some of this stuff looks like. And he is much more high church. His miracle worker is a farmer with a banal but very bizarre request. He wants his mares in this breeding season to produce red, probably chestnut, foals with white heads. Now, lest you think this is entirely nuts, and I certainly did when I first started reading this stuff, let me inform you that this is indeed a thing. There are rare genetic instances which produce such coloration in horses known as splash white, which produce very weird looking horses, but nonetheless something liable to increase their market value. So our farmer appears to be very sane, but very, very mercenary. Just as Jesus tries to dismiss the Canaanite woman in Matthew 15 because she isn't a Jew, Ita tries to put off the farmer's outlandish request, though she is not nearly as rude to the farmer as Jesus is to the woman. He is really foul to her. The farmer responds to Ita's denial or putting off in a true Carolingian fashion. He recites a creed. Now, like the unison affirmation in our service, the credo is a key part of the Mass that authenticates membership and the right of the member to be in the group. Ita may not like his request, but the farmer proves himself a believer, and as such, he is entitled to her aid. But what an odd little creed he produces to constrain her, to oblige him. He invokes the creator of all the colors of the world, sky and earth, sea and mankind, clothes and flocks. This is hardly heretical, but it is not part of any common litany, and it is a little strange, as well as specifically tailored to his self-serving request. He is demanding to be made a rich man regardless of any vast eternal plan, and he gets it. I do not know what was in the hagiographer's mind when he crafted this story, but this weird little credo of colors recalls for me the vivid descriptions of things from especially the colors of the wind from Psalter Naran, a lengthy 10th century poetical work in Middle Irish. Attention to and appreciation of the material natural world is so basic in early Celtic literature, Christian and secular, that it is hard for me not to see it as reflected in this hagiographer's mind, again, consciously or not. We do not have pristine pre-Christian texts, let alone music from early Ireland, but we know Christianity did not arrive there into a vacuum. No new kind of thinking enters into a culture in a vacuum. It is only reasonable to think that elements of Ireland's indigenous culture entered into its Christian ways of thought and its literature. I think of it rather like the music that we have been using for this service from Latin America. As European missionaries carried Christianity into the New World, Christianity absorbed colors from the indigenous cultures it came to dominate. The composers we have heard today were born in Spain and Italy and wrote music based on European styles, but they got to Mexico, Guatemala, Argentina, lived among the native populations there, and things, instruments, drum beats, languages, accents crept in. Humans carry the things that matter to them into new ways of thinking, believing, and living, and we are the richer for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. And may we continue to do that ourselves, to carry what is most sacred and important to us from our traditions and our families into new ways of being, perhaps new ways that can provide some new kinds of miracles, miracles where everyone can be fed what they need. Maybe even some fun miracles, like horses that have coloring we like. May we bring these miracles into the world with our love, our connections, our traditions, and our willingness to believe in new possibilities. We'll hear one last piece of music to close out this time together.
Thank you.